South Africa's economy grew faster than predicted in the first quarter of 2022, returning to pre-COVID-19 levels due to robust performance in industries including manufacturing. The upward trend in growth will provide some relief to South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa, who has been under pressure to increase the country's growth rate. The country's statistics agency, StatsSA, said that in the first 3 months of the year, gross domestic product increased by 1.9% in quarter-on-quarter seasonal adjusted terms and 3% year-on-year unadjusted terms. Now, despite an overall drop in the unemployment rate, the quarterly Labor First survey shows that there were more than 7.9 million unemployed persons in South Africa during the first quarter of this year. As a result of the changes in employment and unemployment, the official unemployment rates fell by 0.8 percentage points from 35.3% in the first quarter of 2021 to 34.5% in the first quarter of 2022. Now, meanwhile, the enlarged definition of unemployment witnessed a 0.7% drop, indicating that more discouraged people are going to work, bringing the rate to 45%. And today, President Ramaphosa is expected to update Parliament on the role of the presidency in leading economic reconstruction and recovery and social transformation in the country. So these figures will definitely be part of that conversation. Let's look at how South Africa's GDP and employment data has improved. This is Business Edge. I'm Tolulokwe Adeleru Balogun. Joining me now is Professor Yanni Rousseau, economist and professor at Wits Business School. Professor Rousseau, welcome once again to Business Edge. Thank you so much for joining me. Okay, I think you've muted your... Okay, there you go.
Good afternoon. It is afternoon in South Africa, and good afternoon to your viewers.
Thank you so much. So let's start with this. We've seen an intense 2 years of pressure and contraction, and this is something that has played out with the data that StatsSA has been reporting. But now it looks like there are some sunshines coming through the clouds in the skies. At 1.153 trillion rand, we're seeing the GDP getting back to around the pre-COVID-19 levels. What are some of the things that you think are finally aiding recovery now?
Well, South Africa's economy has started recovering after a very deep contraction in 2020. And of course, the commodity boom is beneficial to South Africa, as South Africa is a very important commodity export country. However, I should hasten to add that South Africa's population growth is 1.5% per annum. So economic growth of 1.9% per annum is hardly enough to cater for the growing population. And the country really needs a much higher sustained economic growth rate to take us out of poverty and to address the unemployment problem.
And when you look at all of this in terms of the main contributors, we heard from the Statistician General of South Africa, with the main contributors being manufacturing, trade, and finance. What other industries seem to be doing well at this point in time, sort of bringing back the numbers that South Africa was doing before COVID? Again, looking at possibly comparing them with those who are now at this point in time performing under expectation or not at their pre-COVID levels.
Yeah, indeed. The South African agricultural sector is also doing well because we had a very good raining season down here, and we are very glad to report that, because I am concerned about food shortages in the world as a result of the war between Russia and the Ukraine. But the big challenge facing South Africa is to get this growth rate to accelerate even further so that we can ensure a better standard of living for all South Africans, and that we can get out of our fiscal problems. The South African government's deficit before borrowing has grew substantially over the COVID period. The government debt as percentage of the GDP is very high, and the government cannot continue like this. The government needs more tax revenue. And the only way to get that is through more rapid economic growth.
Okay. let's talk about mining. Mining is such a large part of the economy for South Africa, and unfortunately, it ranked low. We know that there was the 3-month Sibanye-Stillwater strike, and we are hearing that that strike could be over soon because workers have agreed to a wage increase of up to 1,000 rand. But mining contributes anywhere from 7 to 8% to the GDP, given a good year, depending on what's happening. If economic recovery is to be sustained, what do we need to do for the mining industry?
Yeah, of course, commodity exports are dependent on international commodity prices, and there is a commodity boom, as I've said. So South Africa is reaping benefits, but South African miners are facing internal challenges in terms of getting their ore from their mines to the South African harbors and then get the ore exported through the South African harbors. So it's very important that the South African government should make sure that the rail infrastructure in the country works optimally to help the mine producers to get these exports to the harbors so that it can be sold on international markets and so that it can help to continue boosting South Africa's economic activity. I should also just explain that South Africa is, of course, a very important economy in Southern Africa. We are by far the largest economy in Southern Africa, and therefore more rapid economic growth in South Africa will also be beneficial to other countries in Southern Africa, countries bordering on South Africa, but also countries in the SADC region. So if the South African economy can continue to recover and grow more rapidly, it will have a beneficial spin-off effect through the whole region.
And I want us to stick on this because there's this conversation happening now. It's not just Sibanye-Stillwater. We've seen it over the past several years when it comes to wage disputes and how powerful the unions are. But the wage disputes is not just simply for the unions. We've seen the calls for the wages to be increased for civil servants across board. We've seen that happening across the continent as economies try to shelter their people from the effects of the Ukraine-Russia conflict. So when you look at the effects of stagnating wages, maybe, let's use that phrase, stagnating wages for the general populace and then increasing, as we've seen, fuel prices and food prices, how much of an impact do you think this is going to have on South Africa's recovery? This is a situation beyond the country's control.
Of course, wage increases in South Africa are always a highly politicized space, especially in an environment where, as you've said in the intro, 34.5% of the people are unemployed. So in South Africa, there is the sense that the jobs of the currently employed must be protected at all costs and that their wages must be pushed up. And it seems that such an approach has little sympathy for people outside the job market. So in my view, the main focus of government, of trade unions, and of businesses should be on how to bring more people into the job market so that South Africa's serious unemployment problem can be eradicated. One way of doing that, of course, is wage restraint in wage negotiations by trade unions.
All right, so StatsSA also measures expenditure in terms of determining the total demand in the country's economy. So far, how has South Africa, sort of fared in this? We particularly see that households, as we mentioned earlier, are having to spend more money on food and fuel. And of course, this is costing them more towards what they can spend in the economy. In terms of expenditure and the economy, where do things stand?
Well, as is the case in many other countries in the world, South Africa is also suffering high food inflation at the moment. Our food inflation rate is well above our overall inflation rate, which of course impacts heavily on households, but particularly so on poor households in South Africa, because poor households spend a much larger portion of their income on food. So it remains a challenge in South Africa to contain inflation, and with containing inflation, also to contain food inflation to make it easier, especially for poor households, to survive under difficult economic conditions. It is unfortunately true that inflation is now becoming a worldwide problem. It is suddenly the only topic that central bankers want to discuss, The national central bankers in the developed economies have not spoken about inflation for 30 years, and it's as if they've now rediscovered inflation as a problem, as opposed to a country like South Africa, for instance, where we've had a battle to contain inflation all along. So the inflation target remains 3 to 6% per annum, and monetary policy will be set with the object of the object of keeping inflation in that target range. And if inflation can be contained, food inflation will also be contained, which will be beneficial to poor households.
All right, Professor Rousseau, hold the line. The conversation will continue. We also know that today South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa is expected to provide updates on his government's progress since the 2022 State of the Nation address. We'll also get into what he could be focusing on and also see if Q2 will continue in this growth trajectory for Africa's most developed economy. The conversation continues after this. And still with me is Professor Yanni Rousseau, economist and professor at Wits Business School. Now, South Africa has battled historic unemployment figures for the past 2 years. The rate rose to a record high of 35.3% in the fourth quarter of 2021 from 34.9% in the third quarter due to job losses, mainly in manufacturing and construction. Now, for Q1 of 2022, the country witnessed the first drop in 2 years, with new jobs being created between Q4 2021 and Q1 2022. The number is huge, but still continues to pale in comparison to the nearly 15 million unemployed workers. So, Professor Rousseau, let me start with the fact that jobs were lost mainly in manufacturing and construction, and we've seen improved jobs data. Has anything changed with the manufacturing and construction industries to the point where they are taking on more new jobs and adding to this positive trend now?
Well, unfortunately, in South Africa, it's very expensive to employ people. And I'm not only talking about wages, I'm talking about the full cost of employment. And therefore, in South Africa, industry, manufacturing, even mining, businesses have moved from labor-intensive manufacturing to capital-intensive manufacturing. So we really need new small businesses that can create jobs for people. So for that, we need deregulation in our economy to stimulate small business activity. And that will create jobs for millions of jobless people in South Africa.
So while the numbers really are not impressive, as you said, it's looking at creating jobs for millions of people. We're seeing a couple thousand jobs being created. So where are these new jobs coming from now? Are they returning jobs, more of people returning to certain positions in industries which they may have left last year?
They are in the main returning positions. If you look at the unemployment figures over the COVID period, you see a large jump. And it seems that some of those jobs are now returning into the economy. However, I don't see from where I am a new drive of new jobs in the economy, new jobs being created. It is, as you rightly described it, mostly returning jobs.
Okay, so what else we've seen is that the improved figures only represent this first quarter of 2022, but they don't take into effect, of course, because of the timeline, the flooding in April in KwaZulu-Natal, as well as the increased load shedding that South Africans are now being subject to. How much impact do you think these things will have when we see the figures coming out for Q2?
Well, unfortunately, have a negative impact. And the flooding is a once-off event, but South Africa has been suffering what you call load shedding since 2007. So for the past 15 years, Eskom, our power supplier, and the South African government have not been able to sort out electricity supply to South African businesses and households. And there's no doubt in my mind that unreliable electricity supply is a deterrent to investment, the cost of which we will never be able to calculate. But if Eskom and the government can't supply electricity on an uninterrupted basis, we are really dreaming if we think there will be massive new investment in the economy to take us forward. So the first challenge is to sort out Eskom and to sort out electricity supply before this economy will grow at very high growth rates as we need.
So if you leave out the flooding and you leave out the issue around the load shedding we're seeing, what do you think Q2 data is going to look like? Will we see a continued trajectory in terms of upward GDP growth and rather economic growth for the country, and a continued downward trend for the unemployment figures?
Well, in my view, this government will continue muddling through. And this government has no clear plan to get us out of the current problems. For instance, if you look at the latest IMF report in South Africa, they've been reporting the same problems for the last 5 years. The governments do nothing. So the government will continue muddling through. Our growth rate will continue to be stuck in the region of, say, 1.5% to 2%. At the same time, South Africa's growth potential has declined from 3% where it was before to probably 1.5% or 2%. So we are caught in a low growth trap. And South Africa will remain in this unfortunate position until such time as we see policy changes from the side of the South African government.
And let's talk about the government. So today, the president is facing Parliament, where he will share what he believes his administration has done for the economy. So you've talked about the fact that the country needs policies, economic policies that will move growth up. So that sort of makes me think that you don't believe there are policies on ground now. What do you think the president has to say to Parliament when it comes to economic recovery and transformation?
Well, the president will have much to say to Parliament, but unfortunately, the debate will be, call it, the whole debate will be under the cloud of a recent break-in on the president's farm,
yes,
where some cash was stolen. And the opposition parties in Parliament will do their best to make that the debate topic, rather than to listen to what the president will have to say. The president has some explanation to do. He has done some explanation. It's clear that the opposition parties are not happy from what he said. And unfortunately, the debate will not focus on South Africa's future and South Africa's economic growth, but it will focus on the break-in at the president's private home on his farm. That is unfortunately the nature of politics.
Yes, and we can definitely understand that here in Nigeria as well. So, Professor Rousseau, before I let you go, just finally this. You have mentioned, of course, commodity prices as high as they are right now, and a bit of benefit that South Africa has been seeing. But the converse side of that is, like everyone else across the country and across the continent, across the world, we're seeing high inflation, increased fuel costs, increased food prices as well, as all of that. How do you think all of that will play out in the coming months? There does not seem right now to be an end to the Ukraine-Russia crisis, which is mainly fueling that sharp increase we've all experienced. So what do you think the things are going to be for South Africa in the coming months?
Well, we talk the world and we talk South Africa. It's unfortunately true that international central bankers in developed countries misread the inflation trajectory. They spoke about transitionary inflation. Inflation is never transitionary. Inflation is always a danger. My words, inflation is ungood, and it's public enemy number one. So we're going to see a lot of focus in developed countries on containing inflation. And the big danger for the world now is that we can run into what is called stagflation, which the world suffered in the 1970s, where we have high inflation with negative economic growth. So the challenge for South Africa is to contain the inflation rate, irrespective of what happens in the rest of the world, and to implement policies to make sure that we see sustained economic growth domestically.
All right. Thank you so much, Professor Yanni Rousseau. We will be talking to you sometime soon.
Thank you.
All right. And the conversation leads one to suspect there may not be so much to put in store when it comes to these improved GDP figures as well as the unemployment rates in South Africa. But an improving trajectory, better and positive outlook in the coming months will possibly mean a lot more for the continent's most industrialized nation. And don't forget, I did mention that President Cyril Ramaphosa will be speaking to Parliament later today. Do stay with us right here on News Central, and we'll give you all the updates as he addresses Parliament. But as my guest has said, that may be overshadowed by the theft at the president's farm in Limpopo and the economic, or more, the political fallout from that. But you can stay with News Central. We'll have all the updates and the latest on that. You're watching Business Edge. When we come back, it's NC4 to watch. And now to the stories we're keeping our eyes on, which take us first to North Africa, where Algeria has suspended a 20-year friendship treaty with Spain, which pledged the two countries to work together to curb economic migrant flows and ban imports from Spain, increasing a dispute over Madrid's position on Western Sahara. Kenya Power has launched a 340 million Kenyan shilling live line laboratory where it will test equipment including trucks, insulating blankets, link sticks, and a line hose tester in a bid to tame blackouts and save the utility company from revenue losses. Nigeria's top lender, Access Bank, will acquire a majority stake in Sidian Bank from Centum Investments for 4.3 billion Kenyan shillings, around $36.8 million. 2 years after it entered the Kenyan market with the buyout of Transnational Bank. And finally, crude oil prices gave up early gains on Thursday after parts of Shanghai imposed new COVID-19 lockdown measures, outweighing news of China's stronger than expected exports in May. And that's the business we have for you today. Don't forget to follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. Stay with us throughout the day for the latest coverage of all things Africa, because we put Africa first. Make sure to make it a date, 11 a.m. tomorrow, West African time, for Business Edge. And I have some great news to share. But the news will only be shared when you watch us tomorrow. I'm Tolulokwe Adeleru Balogun. So make sure you stay with News Central. At the top of the 12 o'clock hour, News Central Now comes your way.